Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm looking at the Sunken Empires, Treasures and Terrors of the Deep for the Pathfinder role-playing game by Baron Hodge, forward by David Zeb Cook. And the intro that Zeb Cook wrote is about the Aboleth and how it entered the D&D world, and how it was originally intended to be used and how it was used eventually. And I happen to be a big fan of the Aboleth. I think they make a really good background top tier enemy, you know, one behind a number of different facades. So as the characters begin to think they've found what's the true conspiracy, who's behind the true conspiracy, they find another layer. Not too many. You probably want to do like 3 and have the Aboleth be number 3. 3 is a good number. You don't want to bore them to death. You don't want to be like 6. They're gonna quit and go become farmers at that point. Then we have a chapter on lost cities of myth and legend, and they talk about historical myths in this, and they discuss Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu, and then they talk about some specifics that would fit into pardon me, fit into the mythological undersea empires from our own historical legends. And I like this because like so far everything I've talked about is completely system neutral. There is not a single stat in here. So this is stuff that could be applied to anyone that wants to do a benthic style setting. And there is even this really quite lovely map in here. Then we have pelagic characters, which is the underwater races, and they give a half merfolk race, in case your game does not have a half merfolk race or an aquatic race other than, say, aquatic elves. And they talk about how they would be how they could, you know, interact with the world, and then they talk about all kinds of underwater class variations. So instead of just, you know, your average, you know, bard or barbarian and throwing them into an aquatic environment, how you could tailor those core and base classes to fit into an aquatic campaign, which I think is nice. Now, admittedly, this is more specific to the Pathfinder system, but there really isn't a huge amount of stats in here that you could not apply to other systems. So if you're going to be running any kind of fantasy system, I think that you're going to find inspiration when they're discussing the aquatic classes. When they get to the feat section, yeah, that's far more specific to, you know, 3.5 or Pathfinder. They get to magic items and to things like that. And for example, that's a really awesome illustration of someone wearing an aquatic style outfit and using a net, which is and a trident, which is a great combination from an aquatic environment. Then we get into aquatic equipment. Now, one of the things they touch on here is kind of the pseudo-scientific super science that is often associated with like Atlantis or Lemuria and Mu. So you've got lots of technology in here that is powered by these ancient battery technologies and such. And I think they're cool because essentially it's magic items without the magic. And I think it really does fit into a campaign that was like steampunk, where there's very little magic, or it's more psionic, or it's really low magic. So you're really relying more on like alchemists and things like that to provide the supernatural aspect. Because if you're running a high fantasy setting, I think a lot of these pieces of equipment and the magic items that they put here, while interesting, I don't think are all that attractive. Because if you have to like wear a big ass battery on your back to power the blasting rifle or pistol that you're carrying, very Buck Rogers, very Atlantis, cool. But it's a whole lot bulkier and more difficult to use than like a wand or a spell or a magic weapon. So I think you're going to have to put these fit best into a campaign where you're not having a lot of high fantasy magic. I think they have value and you could especially be useful if they were put into an environment where magic was not available, and yet these things still worked. So that could be situationally interesting. And they do have one actual magical effect in here, which I thought was really cool, and I don't think I've ever seen it before, which was a weapon weapon ability, and can be applied to mostly blunt weapons like hammers and such. And it's called the Forge Fire, and it is a plus 1d6 fire damage. But if you put it onto a hammer, that hammer can then provide all the heat you need for forging metal items. So all you need is a hard surface, and you are ready to forge. That's awesome. And I read this and I'm like, why did I never see this before? That is such a cool idea, and very appropriate for an aquatic environment where having a forge may not be all that easy. And speaking of the fantasy tile weapon, there you go. There's an illustrations of the kind of thing I'm discussing here that really fit beautifully into an Atlantean or kind of a steampunk environment. And there's one of the batteries I was talking about. But I think that, again, if you're using high fantasy standard Pathfinder or D&D settings, I think they're not going to be all that attractive. There are a bunch of new spells in here for your spellcasters, which is always cool, obviously, with some aquatic themes. And quite a few of the class and weapons featured in here allow the players to not have to worry about the fact that they're wielding, a big blunt object underwater, because you can't. Doing this motion underwater is incredibly difficult to do. This, by the way, is a masher. I just happen to find it very attractive. It's an antique, and this is difficult to do underwater. But a lot of the class features and things like that would allow you freedom of movement, essentially, but more of a limited variety, so that you could actually use the kind of a hammer motion and do forging underwater with the type of magical enchantment I just mentioned. So I think that's kind of cool. They have this is a shield, and look at that, man. That is just so cool. I love this kind of stuff. They really did a nice job with the illustrations in here, and I mean, top notch, man. Top notch for the bony tooth style armored fish. I have a figure for that. I can't remember the name of the fish off the top of my head, but very, very cool. Overall, this is a collection of articles and things, more than one cohesive setting. So I think it's more applicable to a lot of people that are going to be doing aquatic Pathfinder style adventures. And there we have a great illustration of an aboleth. Now, while I like this a lot, and I do recommend it to anyone that wants to do it, and it's very applicable to, very approachable rather, and it's not all that big, and it wasn't all that expensive. How much is it? $19, I think. I think I paid about that. I bought it off of an estate sale site, believe it or not. I would be remiss if I did not mention Cerulean Seas, which is a D20 setting, which presents so much utility for someone that wants to do an aquatic campaign. I've done numerous comments about this. There's videos out there where I reviewed a number of their products that they've produced over the years, and they are just the best aquatic supplements I have ever seen. Really breaking down the three-dimensional combat aspects of underwater environments in a way that I've never seen done better in any other game, any other supplement, really. But this is more system neutral in many ways. I think very approachable, and if you're just going to get your toes wet, pardon the pun, this would be something that I think you want to look into. So this is Sunken Empires for the Pathfinder game, and I do highly recommend it.